Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru. Welcome to minute 69 of Awake, Minute by Minute podcast. I will be your host today, Chris, and with me we have the amazing Priyank. Priyank, say hello.
Hello, how are you?
Listeners and the viewers. Good to be back. I missed last week's episode, so happy to be back. And we have the incredible Mike. Mike, say hello to everybody. Hello.
How's it going, guys? Yeah, it's a royal wave. Yeah,
royal of you.
Yeah,
royal wave of you there, Mike. Okay, so I missed the last week's episode, minute 68, but it looked pretty nice. I'm sad to miss that because it was pretty impactful. Was it everything that you thought it would be and more, guys? Interesting minute.
As they all are.
As they all are, exactly. That's what I was looking for. But really, in this minute, we have a continuation of the last minute, don't we? And to jump into it, really, we saw in the last minute, there was more of a sense of urgency building up. The acceleration, as Sri Muralini Matha described it as, that the SRF monks were experiencing through Yogananda's pursuit of the divine. And the music was very uplifting, wasn't it? Very inspiring, I thought, in the last minute or two. Which was, I don't know about you guys, but just on an artistic note, I really enjoyed the music in this minute, in the last minute. It's almost like delicately balanced and sort of poised to reflect Yogananda's, like, I don't know, his demeanor is like strength and force, but then with the delicate balance as well. So yeah, it was just really quite awe-inspiring for me just listening to this, and it struck me when I first watched the documentary. I thought this was a really nice bit of the documentary. And really, we see, an increased awe of the Guru at this time from the monks, don't we? And in minute 69, there, as I said, there is this continuation. So Brother Chidananda makes an appearance. He's got this beautiful backdrop. Is that in Encinitas?
Encinitas, I think.
Encinitas, sorry. He's in beautiful Encinitas, and he's there, and he's telling us about Yogananda building temples, funding brotherhood colonies, and really encouraging people to live together in spiritual communities, which we'll talk about. And all of this is accompanied by a flurry of images and videos, which are all pretty great to see. And we have an appearance of Professor Goldberg. He's back in, and he's in quite a bit, isn't he? And he's in a few more times in the coming minutes. But he does make another appearance, and he's talking about in 1945, Yogananda was writing the autobiography of a yogi, and the USA dropped the fearful atomic bomb at the time. And we see a rather sharp change of tone. The music stops, beautiful music. And we see a video of the atomic bomb and the devastation of the land and of the people in Japan. So the minute really ends. It kind of teeters. We're teetering into the next minute actually here. For any of the keen, eagle-eyed observers, we are looking at Oppenheimer. He does make an appearance. Oppenheimer, he was a leading physicist at the time, and thought of as the father of the atomic bomb. And he gives this famous quote from the Bhagavad Gita in there, which we'll look at in a moment or two. So plenty to unpack. So let's jump into it. Chaps, what were the kind of impressions of this minute? I mean, it is quite a heavy subject of the atomic bomb, but what's the general take on this minute, Priyank? What do you think?
Yeah, two big topics really about communal living, and then also in some way it's talked about the devastation that can be easily caused by high densely populated communal living, i.e. in cities, i.e. civilians can become an easy target because everyone's next to each other, especially for something such as the atomic bomb. And back in the day, as the population was sparsely residing, that wouldn't have been such a threatening proposition, the atomic bomb. So it's an interesting parallel there.
Dynamic, yeah, it is. It is indeed, yeah. And the Yogananda talked a lot about this, didn't he? About the atomic age, and we can delve into that in more detail. But I thought it was funny actually. There's a picture immediately that we see with Yogananda, as Brother Chidananda is talking, and he's standing there rather stoically with a cane. And I thought to myself, did he use a cane? Was he known to have used the cane? I don't see any other pictures of him ever using the cane, but maybe he picked one up from time to time. Do you guys know at all? I was curious to find out.
Isn't there that one there's that one painting of him with a cane, and there's also that very nice picture of him with some children with a cane, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
So
maybe he did use a cane from time to time. But regardless, he's looking very stoic in some of these images and pictures, isn't he? And yeah, I'll just touch on what the pictures that we see when Brother Chidananda is talking. We see him Yogananda walking with a group of people. Who, I wondered who were they, but I think this is maybe at the Mother Center, and he's doing a sort of slow walk almost with a group of devotees. And it looks pretty awesome. But he's in the center, and everybody's walking around him, looking very finely dressed, as was the way to do it at the time.
And it's in color. This is a color video, which obviously wouldn't have been color back in those days. So this would be a digitally enhanced video, which you can kind of see by the very bright colors of Guruji's robe.
Yeah. I could imagine Guruji just directing everything. Yeah. So he's looking at the camera like, are you rolling? Yes. Okay, let's go. So yeah, and we see these pretty amazing pictures of the construction of Mother Center in LA, right? So we see multiple pictures there. And
it's Lake Shrine.
Oh, sorry, apologies, Lake Shrine. So you see the
three buildings. I think there's construction of Hollywood Temple and Encinitas construction as well, I think. In there.
Yeah. And you see the builders really in full flow. And it's quite an exciting time. Yogananda really in full swing with everything that he was doing. But interestingly then is, Priyank, you mentioned something for us really to talk about was what Brother Chidananda said, which was Yogananda was encouraging people to live together in spiritual communities. Now, this is a topic that I did not think would be controversial. But as I looked into it, I found that there was just some discrepancies really with the subject online, where Yogananda had talked about it before, but really whenever I looked into this, it's a lot of the Anandamayi village people that seem to be really running with this concept and taking it to a very good degree. Is that what you guys know about the subject as well?
Yeah, so Ananda village, I think you're referring to. But they, Yogananda, I think we talked about this in a previous podcast as well, and he talked about this in one of the East-West magazines, if I recall. And he said something along the lines of, a few families should get together and pool their resources together, and if they did that, they'd have more time for meditation, and they'd have less of a need for financial stability and wealth and things like that. And obviously I'm probably vastly misquoting there, so but yeah, that's certainly true. And I think that was at the time also where Gandhi was creating his communities of self what's the word, just living, being self-reliant, that's the word. Forming your own little farms and your own little labor forces that work together for the common good. And there's also I think the largest experiment of this is the Auroville ashram in Aurobindo, in South India near Pondicherry, which is basically they even try to do away with money.
Yeah.
Which is quite a grand experiment, shall we say.
Is that successful? I've heard multiple
people. Well, people from all over the world are living there, so
Yeah.
you can decide whether or not. I intend to go there. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard more. I have heard more success stories regarding that than not. I live in a eco village in Brazil when I'm there, so maybe we can start our own, shall we, chaps? Let's go there, do the podcast there,
let's do
pull our
it.
resources. Have a, as you, I think Yogananda talked about the threefold. He said church, job. Yeah, I can't remember the other thing, but the way he talked about it was church, job, and something else. Essentially, to have the three things that you need and live simply. And it is an interesting concept. A friend of mine was very, very keen on doing this himself, unrelated to the SRF years ago in South Africa. And I know there are many popping up around the world. My father-in-law went to one in Brazil near Sao Paulo fairly recently, and it's fully self-sustaining. So people are doing it around the world, and they're teaching yoga in many of these places because I think it goes hand in hand, doesn't it, Mike?
Yeah, I think the idea itself to just start your own community, I don't think there's anyone would say it's anything against this, but I don't think Yogananda really, what his idea was is that a group of devotees come together, right? And like search God, look for God together. Like the idea of being self-sustaining is great and stuff, but I don't think he did say that being self-sustaining is good, but that's not, I feel like that's not really what the community living thing was about at the end of the day. He did say that in many different parts. Like if you read the Man's Eternal Quest or Divine Romance, he mentions those kind of things every now and then, how like there's one section where he says, for example, if you live in the big city, there's so many distractions and it's so much harder. He once says that people who live in New York City, they live life like little cogs, right? It is harder to like live the life, make the life about God than when you're like living in a smaller place. But it's interesting. Like when I grew up, my parents had talked about this every now and then because there was this controversy already back then. That I think in the first autobiography there was a mention of a brotherhood of man, and then later on it wasn't there anymore. So there was always a kind of a stance that SRF is not it's not 100% supporting it, and why that is. And I think I think SRF was asked that many times and they answered it many times, but I think that's just not their big focus, establishing people in communities.
There was a quote that I found by Yogananda, and he said, "I got so involved in thinking about world brotherhood colonies last night that my mind got away from me, but I chanted a little and it came back." And that was during a public lecture. And it was curious, that statement to me. And maybe something, I don't know, popped into my mind from where, I don't know, that maybe told me that it's a little early in the part of yoga for this to be like widespread or, really quite common. And I always go back to the yoga's system. So maybe it's more of a utopian idea for the world, but we're maybe needing a little bit more development, spiritual development for the masses, for us all to get there, for the world economic structure and things like this to allow for certain things to happen that way. So maybe he was envisaging what things might be. Completely speculative of me, of course, but I can kind of see like he could see into the future to some degree, and see what is actually possible, maybe the steps. And maybe that's why the SRF just want to focus on the simplicity of his teachings rather than the more complex nature of trying to organize people to live together, which is a whole other story, I think. Priyank.
Yeah, the ideal of the householder yogi is one of the most important messages, isn't it, of Guruji's teachings, where you don't need to run away to the forest or into a community where it's geared solely for spiritual development and upliftment. But of course, we know that Guruji did directly have a hand in establishing the ashrams, which were for monastics, and obviously those are spiritual communities in LA and in Encinitas and also in India as well. So we know that he did do that, but that's obviously not for people that also want to not be a monastic and also live in that life. This is solely for the monastic order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these may form slowly as ripples might form in the water, no? Just wider and wider spreads one day, because it's super rewarding for me living in an eco village myself and my wife, it's the two of us, and living on a land is amazing. Very, very rewarding to be with nature that closely. So I guess that's also part of it, so that you're not disassociated with where your food comes from, like living in the big cities, that you really have part and parcel there. But yeah, it is an interesting subject, and one that, sure, if any listeners have anything that they can add to that, please do let us know. Would you guys live in a spiritual community if one was to present itself to you? Would you uproot yourself from London, Priyank or Mike?
You go, Mike.
Mike, jump in.
I would. I'm not sure. Like the thing is always, you want everything, right? You want your career, you want your spiritual life, you want to have the right people around you. So I'm not saying I would unconditionally just drop everything and move into a little community, but that's kind of one of my goals, to steer myself into into a place that is a bit smaller and a bit more focused on God. That would be great.
I think the wider Wi-Fi needs to be accessible, yeah.
I certainly would move to a spiritual community. I intend to fully check out that Auroville place when I go past that area and seriously consider it.
Yeah, nice. Well, keep us in the loop. My voice is cracking. Keep us in the loop with that, Priyank. Let us know.
You got a cracking voice, Chris.
Oh, thank you very much. Cracking. So Professor Goldberg, he's here. He's making another appearance.
Phil Goldberg. I don't know if he's a professor.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Oppenheimer might be a professor. I don't know.
Yeah, Phil. I'm talking about Phil Goldberg.
A few episodes ago, when we were talking about Encinitas, you were pronouncing it ensign something, and Mike and I just let you pronounce it that way the whole episode. I'm sure everyone was just laughing there.
Oh God, good. That's probably my dyslexia kicking in. Thanks for that.
That's one of the things in California, that usually people try to pronounce the place names in kind of Spanish-ish. Not perfectly Spanish, but usually the vowels go in the Spanish way.
So wouldn't that be then
Portuguese? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be then Encinitas?
No, that would be Italian. And Italian would be Encinitas in Spanish.
Okay, so Encinitas, yeah. I'm paranoid now. Are you saying it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Okay, good. So we've got Phil Goldberg here. He's making another appearance, and he's saying that in 1945, when Paramahansa Yogananda was writing the autobiography of Yogi, the USA dropped an atomic bomb. I don't know about you guys, but every time I see a video of an atomic bomb, it's like I'm seeing it for the first time. It just really grabs my attention, and it's so unbelievable, like the vastness of the destruction that it's capable of. There's a famous video of an atomic bomb under the ocean in the United States, where they had some naval boats spread around the water, and they were testing to see. I think they thought it wasn't going to cause the destruction that it did, but it wiped out basically everything there. And every time I see this video, I think to myself that it was toys in a bathtub, and they somehow like it was all a model. It's just so vast. So it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around the vastness of the destruction that these bombs can cause. I don't know if you guys have that impression, but just watching this again, I look at it in disbelief. Mike, do you have a similar impression?
I think you're 100% right. I think our minds, they don't want to understand it, or it's really hard to wrap our minds around it. When you watch it, it looks like a special effect from a movie or something like that, rather than something that actually happened. And then if you then look at the pictures on the ground, the destruction, how people suffered afterwards, it is just really hard to comprehend. And the more you read and look into it, the more depressing it becomes. So it's a very heavy subject. And maybe our minds, they naturally try to not get into that too much.
Yeah. I think that might be right to avoid the trauma of the experience. But Yogananda, well, somebody who was clearly very aware of what was going on. I wonder, do you guys draw any comparisons with what was accelerating in the West at the time and the wars that were going on, and Yogananda trying to get his mission on? I think he maybe mentioned it once or twice that that it was the West in particular was in dire need of spiritual balancing, because the technology was really ramping up, wasn't it, Mike?
That's definitely the conclusion that the movie comes to. I feel like that's why they put it in this sequence. And I mean, you must imagine you're Yogananda, and you already feel there's something wrong with the world. You feel God is needed. There's not enough worship. There's not enough thinking. The thought of God is vanishing slowly from the earth. And when this happens, the earth, he says that somewhere in Man's Eternal Quest, that if there wouldn't be enough good vibrations on the earth, it would instantly vanish, right? So he's basically come on a mission to save the world. And seeing that nuclear explosions in Japan happen in his lifetime, that must have been a feeling for him. Maybe we have come this far, but hopefully this will be the worst of it, and we will. This is like the peak moment, and then hopefully from there on it will become better.
Priyank?
Yeah, Guruji said, he used to say, like, all those millions or billions that we spend on war and armaments, if we just imagine how much good we could do with that money if it was spent on, building up communities and alleviating poverty and all that stuff. So, yeah, and obviously, especially during his, the time of his life was when he was in prominence in the public eye, between 1930 to late 1940s. The wartime was obviously rife, and both the impact of the end of the First World War and then all the Second World War incidents. So he was very well placed to talk about that, and he did, didn't he? But obviously the mass karma was going in one direction, which was that Second World War.
There was a quote from the autobiography of a yogi that I saw on this note. I'll read it out, considering you're touching on the subject. Yogananda said, only the warmth of brotherhood can melt the present colossal snowball of war karma that may otherwise grow into World War III. This unholy trinity will banish forever the possibility of World War IV by a finality of atomic bombs. Use of the jungle logic instead of human reason in settling disputes will restore the earth to a jungle. If brothers not in life, then brothers in violent death. So he was not mincing his words, and how eloquent and poetic is that statement from him, and so relevant, today. We're talking about similar topics in the media quite often. So no more is it needed than today. But maybe some reassurance just to go back to this, because I really, just to agree to what Mike was saying there, think that as I believe we had a question several minutes prior to this one, somebody had explained that they were shocked when the SRF monk, whose name I cannot remember, said that, oh, don't worry, you know, we're going into a better time, as Mike maybe sort of alluded to there. You don't need to worry about all the world affairs that this person was concerned about. Who was the monk in question? Does anybody remember?
Brother Anandamoy.
Anandamoy. Yeah.
Don't watch the news, I think he said.
Yeah.
And then recently other monks have done similar things, said
Yeah.
similar things.
Maybe for any of our listeners or viewers that don't know about this, Mike, would you be kind enough to read out the reassuring sort of message on the atomic bomb card from the autobiography of a yogi?
The Western day is indeed nearing, when the inner science of...
Sorry.
Is that the one?
Mike, the
Last one down.
second one down.
The last one? Second one down. My guru determined by various calculations that the last Kali Yuga, or Iron Age, of the descending arc started about AD 500. The Iron Age, 1200 years in duration, is a span of materialism. It ended about AD 1700. That year ushered in Dwapara Yuga, a 2400-year period of electrical and atomic energy developments, the age of telegraph, radio, airplanes, and other space annihilators.
I know I love
that
this
word.
subject. This is my favorite subject of all time, I think.
Really?
But any keen listeners would probably know that very much to be true.
Any opportunity to bring it up, he brings it in. I think
Exactly, but
this section of the autobiography, Chris has probably quoted more than any other.
yeah, I am like the Holy Science book, Sri Yukteswar, was definitely a book that blew my mind when I first read it. And this is really what Yogananda is talking about here, yeah. And I think it's relevant. I hope it's relevant to the listeners, because if you think about some of the atrocities that happened 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, where man was no more but mere flesh, you know, and the death was quite commonplace, and killing was quite commonplace. You know, we live in a much better time now. And I just wondered if that was reassuring to listeners on this subject of, you know, death and destruction of atomic bombs and so on. It can be quite depressing, but actually, when we lift our gaze up and see the bigger picture, we're going through an age of, as Yogananda said, the electrical and atomic energy developments that are happening now, is in relation to our age, the Dwapara Yuga, 2400 year period. So we're on the trajectory of purifying the ignorance and coming to better consciousness now. So not a given, not a guarantee that we're just not going to have any, you know, problems with atomic bombs, of course, not to be naive. But is this not reassuring? Could you not take reassurance from this? I do. Mike?
Just need to do a quick flex that I have traveled to Japan, and I went to Hiroshima. And I just want to say about reassuring, like Hiroshima is like this, like we see in one of the pictures, we see a building with a dome that was destroyed. And when they rebuilt Hiroshima after World War II, they let this building stand there. It was actually the Chamber of Commerce, and they let it stand as a monument to the nuclear destruction. And they turned the whole blast radius of the nuclear bomb into a really big park in the center of the city. And it's very beautiful, peaceful when you walk through there now. Mm-hmm. There's obviously a monument to the people who died. There's all kinds of monuments there, but it feels like that out of this total tragedy, human tragedy, and all, like, not just the people who died immediately, the people who then later became ill and died from consecutively. But out of that, kind of this kind of sobered people's minds, all the suffering, and turned it into something beautiful. And I feel like that's what often happens when terrible things happen, and people get out of this kind of ego consciousness and go like, okay, we need to correct and make turn it into something good.
Yeah, absolutely. Priyank.
Yeah, and this kind of that feeling that you just described, Mike, and also what they did with that location of the blast is reflected in the minute with the minutes that they use, because there's a lot of scenes where there's like prayer gatherings happening, and there's an old lady walking very, very carefully towards like, you know, the burnt up community, and the sign, interestingly, adjacent to that old lady that's walking up, is it says something in Japanese text, which obviously I can't
I was going to be
translate,
really
but
surprised if you were to read that.
but I used a Google Lens and did a translate
Really?
thing, and it said please Yamuga Niryu Ji Temple, which is obviously probably an atrocious translation. I tried to Google it and nothing came up. But if any listeners know what that Japanese sign is, please do let us know. But I think it's just a general sense of you know, mourning and prayerfulness and that kind of stuff.
Good investigator skills. Google Lens is what you're using.
Yeah. So any font you see, just put the Google Lens app on it, and it'll translate it there and then in front of your astounded eyes.
This is what part of yoga is it? Amazing. Oh, that's so cool.
And also, if you have a leaf, just take any leaf and put the lens on it. It'll tell you what species it is.
Nice. Oh, very good. I will use that, because I can use that in the Eco Village.
Yeah,
I have no idea what I'm looking at.
This is Brazil plant.
Yeah. Some native plant. Yeah, the botanists among us would be not happy. You know, when I was searching through you know, some material looking into this subject, Yogananda really talked about this quite a lot, the atomic age, and he talked about the life-trons and things that underline that as well, which I thought was always pretty special to hear, because Yogananda is clearly looking into his perceptive lens, using Google Lens, maybe his spiritual lens, to reveal what's behind the atom that science today may not know. He called it life-trons, didn't he? Which is pretty epic. But he did say something really, you know, mind-blowing to me. And one of the many things about the autobiography that I loved was that he talked about Atlantis in 9,500 BC that was meant to have vanished. And he said that, you know, although people talk about cataclysms and destructions that way, he said it was destroyed as a result of their misuse of atomic power, which really, I was glad I was sitting down for that one, which is, you know, shocking, it's deeply saddening, and, you know, all the rest of it. But isn't it great that he's sharing stuff like this with us, that we can take the wisdom from that? And, you know, hopefully we're doing that a little bit in this podcast, that everybody obviously would go against any use of violence. But certainly Yogananda is sharing a lot of this information with us to try to warn us to not repeat history, is it not? But yeah, certainly interesting there. And maybe, Priyank, would you want to read out the mind-blown atomic bomb card, just the first bit of that?
Yes. The Western day is indeed nearing, when the inner science of self-control will be found as necessary as the outer conquest of nature. This new atomic age will see men's minds absorbed and broadened by the now scientifically indisputable truth that matter is in reality a concentrate of energy. Finer forces of the human mind can and must liberate energies greater than those within stones and metals, lest the material atomic giant, newly unleashed, turn on the world in mindless destruction.
So he's speaking again very stoically, very poetically, as on such a subject that is clearly very, very heavy. But then we have to switch over to Oppenheimer,
Oppenheimer,
who was the leading physicist at the time. Was speaking in similar strains, wasn't he? He was speaking in similar tones, where he quoted the Bhagavad Gita, of course, and he said, the quote, really full quote is, "Few people cried, most of them were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture of the Bhagavad Gita, 'Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.'" And the video is quite kind of haunting, isn't it, really, when you're watching this, and when you hear it, you can hear the emotion in his voice. He's clearly very moved at what's happened. And again, he was known as the father of the atomic bomb. We have a few bits on him, but certainly he was aware, as maybe keen philosopher as well, that he had done something that the Bhagavad Gita talked about, which was interesting. And I think a really famous quote, actually. So many people know that quote. So it's really significant, isn't it? Priyank, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so many people know that quote because of him, I believe, because of the supposed justification for for that bomb and for everything that came after it. But yeah, I share your reflections on that video. It's a very, very powerful and very moving video, because he's kind of looking down almost with regret. But certainly he's justifying his own events that led up to that moment in his life, where obviously he he was pretty much directly responsible for its development, both in terms of the research and in terms of giving over. Because often, sometimes when a scientist discovers something and he realizes the power that it has, or what could happen if it goes into the wrong hands, they may suppress it. But he's obviously decided not to do that, and he gave it over, as was his duty or job, you might say. But he used this line in the Gita, from the Gita, but he was apparently he loved the Gita, and he learned Sanskrit. So this line from the Gita is actually his own translation, and it is a very it's an interesting translation, shall we say, of the line. And he was fascinated by the language and the Bhagavad Gita in general, and probably all Hindu philosophy. He described it, the Awake book says, he described it as the most beautiful philosophical soul existing in any song. Sorry, the most beautiful philosophical song existing in any language. That's what he described the Bhagavad Gita as. But in terms of the translation of that, it's his translation, and I've looked this up, as you guys know I'm a big fan of the Bhagavad Gita, and I compared it to Guruji's translation of the same section. So to remind you, his famous line is, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Guruji's, and so this is, to give you some context, this is in the battlefield where Arjuna asks Krishna to show him the universal, his cosmic form, and Krishna gives him that vision, that perception, and then during that image or that vision, Krishna speaks, and he says, "In guise of endless doom, I come as a voracious time to seize and room in burning maw of mine, the weakling's ore, and all the mortal meat of weary worlds of deathly change, and treat them with my nectar life to new and fearless better strife. Even if thou dost forbear to slay thy wicked foes, still they and warriors, all in brave array, will sure and certain timely have to fall, in my righteous teeth of law withal. So this translation is very different to Oppenheimer's translation. I mean, so I am become death is not even in there. He talks about the endless doom that in the guise of endless doom, I come as a voracious time to seize and room in burning more of mine, the weaklings all. So Arjuna, to repeat myself, Arjuna didn't want to fight, and Krishna is telling him basically, this whole creation of life and death is, within my, this is my design. And in the explanation of this, Guruji says in the Gita, where God talks to Arjuna, the vision was at once both wondrously sublime and fearfully dreadful. Creation, preservation, and dissolution continuously and successfully rolling in the omnipresent blessed light of spirit. The benign, attractive forms within the cosmic idol represent the creative and preservative forces of nature. The gruesome aspects, the devouring of worlds and beings, are expressions of the dissolving power in creation, whereby all dualities, ugly in contrast to the singular infant purity, are consumed and spumed forth again and again to be transformed ultimately into the divine essence of their origin. So it's a completely different translation. Now, we know Oppenheimer was a scientist. So, when you take words literally, especially from the Gita, then you can get these very doom and gloom translations and the quote that he just gave, and then you can misuse that quote to kind of put down your conscience, your if you're feeling guilt, then you can use it as that for to consoling yourself. But as we know from God talks to Arjuna, especially in the beginning sections, every single word is that is used in the poem is both literal and metaphorical. So even down to the names of the characters in the in the war. So everything is metaphorical, and it's interesting that Marinini Mata said that apparently he had this time where he was talking to this called like the great samadhi that he had. Do you want to open that card, Chris, and perhaps read that Marinini Mata bit at the bottom?
Yeah. This is the
Oppenheimer. Yeah.
Can do. He talked to Divine Mother, just an unending flow of conversation all night long. But he said to us afterward, and we saw during that samadhi, that Divine Mother did something unique for those of us who were present. She used his voice to respond. So we were hearing the two-way conversation. When Master would speak, it was his voice. When Divine Mother spoke, it was a different tone of voice. So this went on all night until about 9 or 10 o'clock the next morning. I've often likened it to chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita, the verses that deal with what Guruji called the vision of visions, in which Arjuna received, through the blessing of Krishna, a vision of the universal form, the many-sided aspects of God, which included not only his transcendental absolute nature, but also how that one consciousness evolved into all of the forces that brought forth creation and that brought forth the individual human beings. In other words, the ultimate truth is that every single thing is nothing but the consciousness of God. After the vision, Arjuna said, he threw himself at Krishna's feet and said, "Forgive me that I ever thought of you as comrade or friend."
Yeah, so Guruji had a similar vision, which he likened to that experience that Arjuna had. And in this, apparently, this whole night's conversation that he had with Divine Mother, after this, he kind of changed and became very serious. And he said, Divine Mother has spared me and she's let me stay here for, however much longer I have, and I need to dedicate my efforts. And then he focused heavily on his writings, as we discussed in the previous minute. So it's quite interesting. But some of the translations of this part, chapter 11, verse 32, bear absolutely no resemblance to Oppenheimer's translation or Guruji's translation, which is which just goes to show reading the correct translation or reading the appropriate translation is quite important.
That's just art for you, isn't it? It's everybody takes their own interpretation of art.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. There is a little bit more in there. Mike, I know you mentioned about Oppenheimer sort of regretting the development of the hydrogen bomb. Is there anything more you wanted to add on Oppenheimer there, Mike?
He was afterwards he became a person who was opposing the use of nuclear weapons and the further research into the field, which it was the beginning of the Cold War time, which was seen as anti-patriotic, and eventually it got his military clearance removed. But then a decade later, Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson, one of the two, they gave him an award and they kind of rehabilitated him in the political day-to-day.
Yeah, I don't know what it would do to my consciousness to know that I may have offered in some, something like the atomic bomb. I mean, what do you guys think, just quickly on this subject, just to kind of ponder on it a little bit? Like Guruji talked about the karma of like World War I rolling into World War II and so on and so forth. And if we allowed it to, roll into World War III, then it would be the last one. But it kind of ended on one of the most devastating kind of tones, didn't it? World War II, with these atomic bombs that were dropped, and innocent men, women, and children kind of wiped out. I mean, that would have been a devastating addition to the karma of the war. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, but it also erased a lot of karma, I think. And like Guruji talks a lot about what happened after World War II. Like he said, a lot of the world wars, they had to come because there was this bad karma of colonization. And after World War I and World War II, the world got pretty much decolonized to a great extent. But he still said there is more karma left, and the snowball is still rolling. And he said it would take 100,000 Kriya bonds, sincere Kriya bonds, to melt this karma before it culminates into another war.
Oh wow, 100,000, yeah. Priyank?
Yeah, and being obviously, we see this Oppenheimer that's regretful in a way in this minute, but by the same token, the atomic bomb was meant, and its deployment was meant to end the war. So if they had not deployed it, then heaven only knows how long and how much more destruction the World War II would have caused, and what other ramifications there would have been, because obviously that meant Japan knew that they were defeated, and that had knock-on consequences all around the world. Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, and America wasn't the only country that worked on the nuclear bomb, right? There was like a race, and America happened to win it, but that was also something you can say in his defense, that they would have come up with it anyways, just maybe a different country first.
Yeah, it was kind of came down to that stone cold kind of calculation in the end of how many Americans soldiers might die, and then they decided it was too much in the end, wasn't it? No, it's a super interesting subject matter, and I'm glad we don't live in that era right now. I'm happy to be moved on into a brighter future. so, not wanting it to end on a too much of a grim topic, shall we try to end it on a lighter one? I'll take suggestions on that because I
Yeah,
don't have any plans.
flags. Let's end it with flags.
Okay, go for it.
Because this image has the images used of the pictures of Hollywood, Encinitas, Lake Shrine, etc., being built and finished. Encinitas, I think it was Encinitas, had a picture of a flag, an Indian flag, being hoisted and flown. And then the Hollywood temple, inside the temple, where you can see Guruji and Rajarsi Janakananda, has the American flag next to it, which I thought was interesting. The opening of Encinitas having an Indian flag. I can't remember if there was like a special India Day that day. I don't know, but it would have been interesting for local residents to see an Indian flag flying around. Yeah, Mike.
I think even to this day, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't been in Hollywood Temple in a while now, but they always had an American and Indian flag at the left and the right side of the stage. And I don't think it's an uncommon thing on SRF to see Indian flags flying. Nice.
Well, on the international note, very, very pleased to end it there. And Jai Guru to all. Thank you very much for tuning in into minute 70 on the next episode.
Jai Guru.